power purchase agreements. And if you have not been paying attention, please, it's time for you to really pay attention. Let me explain something with a story. Because inside the power purchase agreements, there's something called availability or capacity charge. There's something called output charge. And there's something called energy charge. It is very critical that we understand these concepts. Let's talk power once again. Welcome to your channel, my channel that informs us, that puts us in a good state of mind to be able to really understand the issues that are affecting us in this country. In this quest, as I promised you, we are going to find out what really has been causing us the high electricity bills. Now, power purchase agreements are a form of PPPs, that is public-private partnerships. The first PPA, power purchase agreement, in this country was signed sometimes about in the late 90s. At that time I was in primary school. Several PPAs were signed when I was in high school, when I was in campus, and even when I was post-campus. And I never bothered, or rather I thought that thing should not affect me. But right now, I am paying for high electricity bills, partly because of those PPAs, those power purchase agreements. And so as a young person, I've always said this, and let me repeat, and when I'm talking about young people, I'm talking about anybody who is less than 50 years. It should interest you to really understand what are these PPPs, what are these power purchase agreements that are being signed, the clauses, the obligations, the taxes, the revenues, all those things that are being put in there, because these things have long-term implications. 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. And so I'm not saying that the old people should not take part in them, but I'm saying that if they're to lead, we must follow their trail. We must be able to basically dig and find out exactly what is being put there. There's somewhere in the Bible, it says that the fathers have eaten the sour grapes. And you know who's suffering? Is the children whose teeth are being set on edge. And so it should interest you as a young person to really understand what is being put on pen, what is being signed, because in another 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 25 years, the people who put you in that problem may not be there, but you will be there, the children will be there. And so it is my request to you that we get to understand what really are being put in these long-term projects. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's wind, let's slow down and start from the beginning. In the beginning, there was you and me. Now, the thing with electricity is it can't be stored. Electric energy cannot be stored. So when it is needed, when you plug in your sockets, when you need it to be supplied, somebody somewhere must supply it. Remember that seesaw thing I was talking about? Now, the guy at the National Control Center has to ensure that, for example, if between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., 800 megawatts is needed, somehow to ensure that there is no blackout, to ensure that there are no issues of other people getting power outages, he must ensure that at least 800 megawatts or more is produced at the same time between 7 and 8 a.m., okay? So, the requirements of us, the consumers, make it look like we are spoiled children. We need 800 megawatts now, it must be produced now. Any time delay or wastage, the thing is gone. So that usage, that profile leads us to something called a load profile or a load curve. The reason why this load profile should interest us is because that curve also shows us something called the peak demand. We like to know during the day, at what point during the day do we have the highest call for power, the highest consumption? It gives us the peak demand. Now that will inform the guys at the National Control Center to know that, okay, if it has been established, as you will see, that we have two peaking points. In the morning from around 5 a.m. to around 9, and again from around 5 in the evening or 6 in the evening up to around 10. Now, once they know those two peaking points, then they are able to basically align the power plants. They will know, okay, if almost at 5 everybody wakes up and everybody is using instant shower and power consumption is spiking, we need a power plant. We need a producer that is able to ramp up, to able to produce a lot of power within a very short period. That's not the time to, for example, start calling on coal power plant that is going to take minutes, if not hours, to produce power. That's the time that you need something that if you can just press, the power is up. Now, in addition to that, we need to understand something called the average load. So average load, of course, there are moments in the curve when it is low, when it is high, but it should interest us to know averagely how much is our power consumption in a day. Now, once we know that, and we also know what is the maximum demand throughout the 24 hours, then we are able to get something called the load factor. Now, load factor is basically a ratio between the average load divided by the maximum demand, or the peak power consumption. A good load factor, as I'll illustrate, is one where it's almost close to 100%. Now, in most cases, you'll never get there, but if you can get 100%, it points to something called efficiency. It basically means there's some level of consistency in consumption. And if you have consistencies, then you can almost predict second by second, minute by minute, which power plant to call upon. So you're not left there wondering, okay, 1 minute they are consuming between 8 a.m. and 7 a.m., people are consuming 700 megawatts. Then between 8 and 9, all of a sudden, they want now to consume 1,600 megawatts. So again, now you are running up and down crazy. Okay, which power plants do we call? Can you call this guy to add us 40 megawatts, the other one to add us 100 megawatts? No. If you have a load factor that is almost close to 100% or 1, then you find that it's beautiful. Now, let's illustrate that with an example. Okay, so this could be around 5 a.m., 9 a.m., noon, 5 p.m., 10 p.m. This is the consumption. Okay, this is our consumption, the amount of power that we are asking Kenya Power to supply us at any given time. Okay, so this is load curve or load profile. So a typical load profile, you find that it varies with time because people are doing different things at different times of the day. So at midnight, you may find, let's say for illustration purpose, let's say this is 1,000, this is 500. You may find that during midnight, maybe the figure is a bit low, fairly stable, or probably dipping. And then it gets around 5 a.m. Well, now there's a surge because everybody's now waking up, people are showering, electronics are up, gadgets, people are charging probably their electric vehicles, whatever it is. There's a surge in usage between 5 and around 9. It generally tends to dip because people are now settling in the offices. So there's a fair usage, almost predictable. This is usually the period, the best periods for the guys at the load center, the national control center. Around 5, again, the reverse happens. People are now getting home, some are still showering, people are using electrical gadgets to cook, and then you end up with another peak that may go on for quite some time, up to around 10. Guys are now shutting down, others are sleeping, usage of power dips, and again it goes back to it tends to move back to midnight where we started. So this could be the typical load curve. This should be your first peak point, but this one, for this case, will be the official peak demand during the period under consideration. Now, various technologies or various power plants can be used to provide various demands during the day. For example, this period that is fairly constant, you could be running geothermal or coal power plants. Very good for coal, geothermal, because these are the plants that, as you'll see in a discussion of the power plant technologies, they are fairly stable. They don't have ability to ramp up or to increase their production very, very fast. So during this period, which is called the base load, it's good to probably run your coal or your thermal power plant, the hydros at this point. Now, this area and this area where all of a sudden there's a lot of power that is needed and it needs to be produced, you may have to now go for a different technology. A technology which has the capacity to increase production of electricity very fast. So, in some countries, they have something called BESS. I'm going to explain what BESS is, which is basically a battery energy storage system or a pumped hydro storage. Again, it's also another adequate method of ensuring that you increase the production of power from, let's say, this point is around 500 megawatts to around 700 megawatts in a very short time. In a very short period, you're able to meet this, you're able to meet these spikes in power demand. So this curve informs us which kind of power plants are used where, at what point, to be able to meet this. You can also use, in Kenya, we are also using thermal power plants to be able to meet this surge in power. Now, there's something called load factor, and that load factor, as I indicated, is basically the difference between the average load, is the ratio between the average load, divided by the peak demand. Okay, so for instance, if we are able to get in average between this midnight and this midnight, what is the average power consumption or power demand? Then, for example, in this, if we can establish that we can guess it's around, let's say 600 megawatts. So the average demand is 600 megawatts. And the peak demand, we can estimate it to about, if we do this is 1,000 megawatts here, so this probably is around 800 megawatts. So the peak demand is 800 megawatts. So we can get the load factor to be the ratio of 600 divided by 800, which gives us, who was the calculator? 6 divided by 8 is around what? It's around 0.75. So, by good standard, a 75% load factor is a very good system. Anything around 60 and above is fairly good. Now that you have understood the load factor, again, I think the question should be, what use is it to us? Now, as I mentioned briefly, it helps the guys at the National Control Center to be able to select the size and the number of generating plants that needs to be called hour by hour, if not minute by minute. Now, the second one, it helps in preparing what you call the operation schedule for the power station. You see, there is another operator at the power station who may want to know, okay, between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., I will be asked to basically produce 40 megawatts. But then again, I may be asked between 9 and 10 a.m. to increase that 40 megawatts to 50 megawatts to meet the consumer's demands. And then again, between maybe 10 and 11, I may be called upon that now that everything has settled and the consumption has gone down, please take back or remove 11 megawatts from the production. So the second thing, it helps the people or the guys at the power plant to be able to prepare the operation schedule. Now, The other thing, which should be much more important, and I may be jumping ahead of ourselves here, but it's very important for us to understand, is it has an effect on something called capacity charge. The final reason, of course, is for stability, as I mentioned. Grid stability. It helps the guys at the National Control Center to basically balance the seesaw. What the consumers want versus what is being produced are nearly even, and that way we all remain with power and stable throughout the whole day. So I'll show you an example of a bad and a good load factor. So in a nutshell, these are example of a good load factor and a bad load factor. So if you have a simple load curve, you can just take a few hours, let's say between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. and you find that your load is generally, let's say this is megawatts. So your load is generally playing like this. This can be considered to be fairly good because if we get the average between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m., the average demand in this example, let's say this is 10 megawatts, this is 5. You may find that average load, average demand may be around 5 megawatts. If you check here, our peak demand or maximum demand is about, if we estimate this is around 6 megawatts. So our load factor in this example becomes the average demand, which is 5, divided by the peak demand, which is 6, and that should give us 83 or 0.83, or which can be considered as 83%. So this is a fairly good load factor. On the other hand, for a bad load factor, again, we'll consider a simple system. We'll take a load curve between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. You have 10 megawatts here. But now this one, instead of having that gentle, smooth curve, we'll probably start here, get a spike, come down, again another spike. Yes. So if this is like 5 megawatts, then our peak demand, we can say, is about 8 megawatts. So the average demand, once you calculate between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m., may come to something about 2.5 megawatts. But we have that period where the peak demand or the maximum demand is 8 megawatts. So the load factor in this scenario is 2.5 divided by 8, and that gives us 0.3125, which is around 31.2%. Now, this is not a good system. So for bringing the Kenyan context, when you study that load demand, that load curve or load profile, you find that we have a very period of low demand from around midnight to around 5 a.m. Sometimes it dips as low as 1.3 gigawatts or 1300 megawatts on weekdays, and during Sundays that low can go as low as about 1,000 megawatts between that period, midnight and 5 a.m. And then of course 5:30 everybody has woken up, and it rises to a peak, a morning peak of around 1,800 megawatts, again between 9 and 10 a.m. as activities begin to pick up and then it will remain fairly constant, and I started to rise at around 5 to a peak of around 300 megawatts, as has been indicated. Now, something else that should interest us is how does our consumption varies from day to day. Now on your screen you can see Sunday is the lowest, I think basically because most people are not working. People are probably indoors, others are outdoors. Minimal power consumption is observed there. It starts to peak on Monday towards Tuesday, with Wednesday being the highest. I don't know what exactly is happening Wednesdays, but you guys probably, you can let me know what you think is happening Wednesdays. And then of course it eases off to Saturday and lowest again on Sunday. Now, aside from that, what are you seeing from this profile? One of the things that I hoped to see here was, it has already been said that people shower twice, but it looks like Kenya, we are kind of defying that logic, because you can see it looks like most people have adopted the philosophy that let's just shower once in the evenings. I don't know what you think. Tell me what is your take on that. Now, the second thing that should interest us is the kinds of power plants that produces power. We should be interested to know how specifically do they work in terms of response time. Remember, for example, if you want 40 megawatts in the next 2 minutes, you cannot count on any power plant to do that. Different technologies, whether it is wind or solar or hydro or thermal, have got different reaction time. And so it should interest us to briefly understand some of the response times that we have in the power plants that we have in this country, because that will also, in the course of discussion, you'll find, based on our power demands, based on the behaviors, remember that load curve we just discussed, those behaviors dictate the kind of power plant that is being installed and when that power plant is being called into action to either increase production or lower production. Now, before I explain the various plant technologies and their response times, there are two technologies that are very essential. That is the battery energy storage system and the pumped hydro storage. The battery energy storage system, that is popularly known as BESS, operates on a very basic principle. Remember the typical battery that we are using in our torches. Okay, so of course you have the positive and the negative terminal here, but now this is now the same battery but in large scale. It has been ballooned, so you can consider that this is like a tank where you are storing your energy. From the positive terminal, we need to get this into something called conversion unit. What happens is, the type of power or current that is being generated from the battery energy storage system is a type of power engineers call direct current. What you ever need in your home is the type called AC, alternating current. So we have to do that conversion to basically convert this power from the DC to AC mode that is of good use to you, for your fridges, to power your electronics and other appliances that you're using in your industries, offices, etc. So after this, we have to do something called stepping up. Remember, recall the stepping up? Yes, we have to step up the voltage of this power to a level that it will interest Ketraco to basically pick up the power. Once we stepped up the voltage of that power, then Ketraco is now able to transport it to Nairobi, to the various places that the power is needed. We also have here a BMS, which is basically a battery management system that coordinates the charging, discharging, the conversion, and interaction between the stepping up unit. So this battery has two modes. There is the charging mode. That is the period when we have excess power. Maybe during the day when people have already relaxed in the offices, there's so much power that is being generated, but there are very few people who are using. So we take that power and store it during the charging mode. Towards evening, now we have a surge, an increase in demand. So towards evening, we now discharge the battery to be able to meet our energy requirements. So in a nutshell, that's the philosophy behind the battery energy storage system. So just to illustrate how this BESS works with other technologies, for example, let's explain how BESS and solar work. Okay, so we are going to assume a typical curve of power generation in a solar plant. Let's assume this is now 7 a.m. in the morning up to 7 p.m. So typical areas in Kenya may receive solar in this mode. It goes high, peaks during the day, and then again towards evening it goes away. So this could be like 8 a.m., this is 9 a.m., this is noon, and then from around 3 p.m. the sun starts fading away, 5 p.m., and then finally, eventually by 7 p.m., the sun is fully gone. So this is the energy or the power that is being generated in a solar plant. Now, if we are to implement or to use BESS in such a solar plant, then to illustrate those two modes, this period when we have some very good solar generation, what's going to happen is we'll take advantage of that good generation and charge our battery. So the battery will be operating in the charging mode. Okay? So that from 3 p.m. when the sun is now going away, and also remember now your usage. People are starting to get home and the power, there's an increase in the demand. At that point now we shift the battery energy storage system to now operate in the mode called discharging. So as it discharges, as the battery energy storage system discharges, it gives us the extra megawatts that we may need to meet our power requirements. Now the pumped hydro storage uses a concept that is almost similar to BESS. The only difference here in this case, we have upper reservoir for water storage. So we have water here in the upper reservoir, and then we have a lower reservoir here, also filled with water. Now we have to find a way of creating a channel that water can flow. That channel connects the upper and the lower reservoir. Somewhere here we have the underground power plant. So this is the place where we do the actual power generation. So this PHS, or the pumped hydro storage, has two modes. The first mode is the pumping mode. The pumping mode is also called the power storage mode. What it means is during those periods when there's generation, or we can generate power, but the consumption is low, instead of letting that go to waste, we pump water. Okay, we pump water up the reservoir to basically act as a stored energy. So we have stored energy up here, but in water potential. What that means is during the other mode, which is called the turbining mode, or in a simple term, power generation mode, we will use this water that has been elevated at the upper reservoir. We'll use the gravity with which it is coming to turn the turbines inside the power plant to generate power. So from around 5 p.m., for example, in Kenya, where there is an increase in power usage, we can take advantage of that, increase our power production, and meet our energy requirements. So that is the concept or the philosophy behind the pumped hydro storage. Now that we understand the various technologies in terms of that are being used to produce power, let's now highlight the response times of those power plants technology-wise. As remember I mentioned, for example, the time it takes for a coal power plant to increase its production when it is needed, when more power is needed, is not the same time that solar or hydro or geothermal or a battery energy storage system will take to meet the same requirement. So I'm just going to highlight here the various plants or power generation modes, technologies, and their respective response time. Okay, so we start with hydro. This is power that is generated from water sources. If you are to call this power plant to increase its production or to start up, it will take between 5 to 10 minutes to honor that call. The second one is the battery energy storage system that we've discussed. Now this is very fast. Its reaction time is between milliseconds to a few seconds. So you can already see that if the demand or there's a serious increase in power demand and you really need to meet the demand very quickly, the BESS is a good candidate. The third one is thermal. Okay, this is power plants that use thermal, but the fuel that is being burned to produce the energy for power production is heavy fuel oil. This one requires about 5 to 10 minutes to meet your requirements. And then the fourth one is again a thermal power plant, but in this case, this one uses gas. Okay, this one will require about 3 minutes to be able to meet your requirements. Then we have coal. Currently, we don't have coal power plants in Kenya. These take the longest, between 10 to 20 hours. Now, coal is not the kind of power plant that you may want to call in because you are in a crisis. Number 6, we have wind or solar, but with no BESS. Okay, so this is just pure wind or solar production, and you have not provided for battery energy storage system. Response time, I don't want to talk about it. Don't count on it, because these are one of the most unstable sources of power. 1 minute you have 100 megawatts, the next minute you have 2 megawatts or nothing. And that's why it's always good to couple the wind or solar generation with a battery. Finally, before we get to the final one, we talk about geothermal. Geothermal power plants have a reaction time of about 30 minutes. And then finally, the pumped hydro storage. This is also equally very fast, between 1 and 2 minutes, and your power requirement is met. So as you can see, various power generation plants have various response times, and depending on the nature of the need, we should be able to select the right one to meet it. Now, back to power purchase agreements. And if you have not been paying attention, please, it's time for you to really pay attention. Let me explain something with a story. Because inside the power purchase agreements, there's something called availability or capacity charge. There's something called output charge. And there's something called energy charge. It is very critical that we understand these concepts. Let me repeat. If all through you have not been paying attention, this is the time you really ought to pay attention to understand availability or capacity charge, to understand output charge, and to understand energy charge. Okay. Let me start by telling you a story. Let's assume in the county of Machakos, it has been established that there is a water crisis. There's a water shortage. And it has been established that this water shortage is in the tune of 3,000 liters per day. So, the demand is somebody or from somewhere, 3,000 liters of water per day needs to be provided in Machakos County to be able to solve that water crisis. Okay? And so, for one reason or another, the Machakos County may not have the capacity to do a borehole or to develop whatever resource that is able to give that 3,000 liters. But the county government may, for example, request an investor to come and put up that water plant to provide the water resource, the 3,000 liters that is required per day. But this is where it gets interesting. And for your information, Machakos County has been picked for illustrative purposes only. Instead of Machakos County requesting the private investor to do a 3,000 liter capacity borehole, or to do a slightly higher 5,000 or a 10,000 liter borehole, it decides to do a 50,000 liter borehole. All right? Now, this is where matters get interesting. After doing the 50,000 liter borehole, okay, the construction has happened, the water is now available. But remember, let's go back to where we started. The need in the county of Machakos was to supply 3,000 liter shortage per day. Instead, a 50,000 liter capacity has been set up by a private investor. Now things start getting elephant. Day one of operation, the county taps or draws 3,000 liters from the borehole. Day two, it's probably 3,100 liters. Day three is probably less. But all through, every day, it plays around 3,000 liters. But this is where it gets more interesting. The private investor signed an agreement through water purchase agreement, okay? That it doesn't matter whether the county government of Machakos takes 3,000, 50,000, 40,000 liters. They will always be paid for 50,000 because they put up a 50,000 water tank or water source. You get how things get interesting. And so there's a charge there called availability or capacity charge. That as long as that power plant, as long as that water borehole or water source is working, the private investor will be paid for 50,000 liters of water. You take it or you pay for it. That is the so-called availability stroke capacity charge. And you'll find it in power purchase agreements. In most PPAs, that clause has been put there. I am putting a 40 megawatt plant. But in the end, once operation begins, only 3 megawatts or only 5 megawatts is ever produced. But you, the taxpayer, must always pay for that capacity. And that's zinc. Because you're going to find it in subsequent episodes, the ramifications of that decision to put capacity charge or availability charge in the PPAs. Now, the second item which you should pay attention to is the output charge. Now, output charge is now, the investor is telling the county government of Machakos that for every liter that is flowing out of a water plant, you're going to pay for it. So the actual, if today only 500 liters was drawn, then the Machakos County government will pay for the 500 liters. If tomorrow it is 3,500 liters, they will pay for 3,500 liters. That is the output charge. Similarly with power. So the first payment that is given to the private investor is the capacity charge. I put up a 100 megawatt power plant, you pay. The second charge is output charge. If today you ask for 10 megawatts, you will pay for that. If tomorrow you ask for 13 megawatts, you will pay for that. So that is the second charge. The third is called energy charge for power plants. Now, the energy charge is you're being charged for the fuel, okay, that is being used to power that plant. For example, if a private investor was asked to put a 100 megawatt thermal power plant, and the fuel that is being burned to generate that electricity is diesel or gas or HFO, heavy fuel oil, every time the person uses that fuel to produce electricity, there's a payment. So, I repeat, if you don't get anything in this episode, always remember availability stroke capacity charge. We are going to meet it pale mbele. Output charge. What actually flows from the power plant. And the third one is the fuel that is used to produce that. So I perhaps mentioned this or I didn't, but the unit of measuring the energy, the electricity that you're consuming in your house is 1 unit of energy is basically if you are supplied with 1,000 watts of power and you use that 1,000 watts of power faithfully for 1 hour. So we take that 1,000 watts, we multiply by 1 hour, we have used it, and then we get 1,000 watt hour. We divide that by 1,000, then we get 1 kilowatt hour. So 1 unit or 1 token is equivalent to 1 kilowatt hour. If I don't mention this anywhere, please remember that always. Now, as we wrap up, there's something called system losses. Because after this episode, we dive now deep into the issues and relay them. System losses is basically an issue of accountability. Remember Kenya Power, which I told you is not the cause of your high electricity bill. Kenya Power buys power from KenGen and from the independent power producer. So, if you use, for example, in a day, that Kenya Power bought 1,000 megawatts, we convert that into energy. Remember that equation of ours, energy is power times the hour of usage. That energy that Kenya Power has bought throughout the whole day, Kenya Power must sell it, and after selling it, remit the cost of that energy to KenGen, to the independent power producer, and even to the imports. So, in a nutshell, whatever comes in must come out. And if it can't come out, there's an issue. Let me illustrate that. System losses are categorized into two. We have technical losses and commercial losses. So technical losses is briefly partly what I explained in episode 1, which I would encourage you, if you have not watched, please go through episode 1. These are the losses that happen because of the general nature of the transmission infrastructure. The transmission lines, the voltage levels under which the distribution or transmission of power is happening, all that fit under the technical losses. Now, commercial losses is the category where we have meter tampering, illegal connections, if you have an inadequate revenue collection system which probably has not been audited, all that fall under the commercial losses. Now, I'm going to show you what system losses mean. We are going to use this funnel system, okay? Where basically, this is Kenya Power's funnel. So we have KPLC here. In this funnel, for it to be accurate and working perfect without any losses, what comes in through the funnel should come out from the funnel. All right, so let's assume that in 24 hours, KPLC purchases 1,000 megawatt of power, out of which 800 megawatt, let's say, is purchased from KenGen within the 24 hours period. The remaining 200 megawatts, let's assume, for illustration purpose, has come from the independent power producers. Okay? Now, remember that formula where we have said to get the energy that has been supplied to KPLC from KenGen and from IPP, we multiply the power, 800 megawatts, times the duration, 24 hours. We can multiply by 1,000 again to convert this megawatt into kilowatt. Now, once we do that, we end up with 1,9,200 . So this is the units of energy that KenGen has sold to Kenya Power. Similarly, for the independent power producer, it is 200 megawatts. We can multiply by 1,000 to convert it to kilowatt, and then times the 24 hours duration to get the energy, which translates to 4,800,000 kilowatt hour. So cumulatively, KenGen and the independent power producers will have supplied Kenya Power with 224,120,120. This is the volume of energy that will have been supplied to Kenya Power. In a working system, KPLC should be able, perfectly working system, KPLC should be able to sell all these and then remit the cost of that, of the purchase to KenGen. Now, let's assume now we are now at the exit of the funnel. At the exit of the funnel, let's assume 600 megawatts goes to the industries within the 24-hour period. That translates to 600. We convert that into kilowatt, we multiply by 24 hours, and it gives us this value. okay, of units. Let's also assume another 100 megawatt goes to offices across the country. If you could do the conversion again by 24 by 1,000, it gives us 400 units. Let's assume the third user or the third category which Kenya Power sells the energy to during the 24-hour period are your farms and homes, and again there another 100 megawatt has been sold. You convert that into kilowatt and then you multiply by the 24-hour period. Again, it gives us that. Now, if you do the summation of what the units that have been sold, it gives you 19,200, like that. You can already see that what has been sold vis-a-vis what was purchased, there's a difference, there's a shortage. So there is a loss here, which is given by 24 million units that were purchased minus the 19,200,000 units that were sold. That gives us a deficit of 4,800,000 units. Now, this is a loss. This loss is what is attributed to the system losses. It could be technical, it could be commercial. Now, this loss, someone has to pay for it. And recalling that KPLC is not Delarue, they have no money minting machine, they must find a way of passing this loss to someone. And you can already guess who that someone is. Currently, the loss, the system losses, is in the region of about 24%. I know right now you are a lot smarter. We have covered the basics. Let me ask you, do you think power purchase agreements should have availability charge? The thing that is called capacity charge. Should you have it? And if not, how should you go about it? Until next time, my friend, stay safe, because in the next episode, we are diving right into the issues. I'll show you 4 causes of your high electricity